The sound of the doors opening. The first thing people always tell you is this: it was just a normal night. That's how every nightmare begins. I've listened to those words spill from trembling mouths for years now. Survivors, witnesses, and police officers who still can't sleep. They all say the same thing. And every time I hear it, I know what comes next. Because normal nights don't stay normal. Not when three men decide to turn a grocery store into a battlefield. The doors open. The automatic doors slid apart with a soft mechanical sigh. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A child laughed near the candy aisle. A cashier counted change, already thinking about going home. Shopping carts rattled across white tile floors, wheels squeaking in tired protest. It was Belgium. Early 1980s. Peaceful. Predictable. Safe. Then the men walked in. 3 of them. Tall. Broad. Moving with purpose. Their faces were wrong, covered in masks, smeared with face paint. Not playful. Not theatrical. War paint. The kind meant to erase identity. One witness would later say the tallest of them didn't rush. He walked like he owned the place. And then the gunfire began. Why I can't let this go. I wasn't there that night. But I've lived with it ever since. I've walked the parking lots where blood once pooled between oil stains. I've stood in supermarkets where shoppers still don't know they're stepping on invisible graves. I've spoken to mothers who set an extra place at the table for children who never came home. This story isn't about killers. It's about what happens when evil walks into an ordinary place, and what it takes to stand against it. Because for years, the truth was buried. And then, it started clawing its way back. Belgium before the fear. Before the killings, Belgium trusted its world. Doors stayed unlocked. Kids rode bikes without supervision. Grocery stores were places of routine, milk, bread, and quiet conversations. No one checked exits. No one scanned faces. Violence was something that happened elsewhere. That illusion shattered in 1982. The first attack was confusing. A robbery, they said. Tragic, but isolated. The dead were mourned. Life moved on. Then it happened again. And again. Each time, the pattern sharpened. 3 men. Heavy weapons. Masks or face paint. Extreme violence. Almost no money taken. That last part terrified investigators. Because robbers kill to escape. These men killed to arrive. The names the public gave them. When you can't name something, it owns you. So witnesses named them instead. The giant, impossibly tall, calm, dominant. The killer, fast, precise, merciless. The old man, older, quieter, watching everything. Police hated those names. But the public needed something to hold on to, because faceless monsters are harder to survive. Escalation. The attacks grew bolder. Supermarkets. Restaurants. Parking lots. They didn't shout warnings. They didn't negotiate. They opened fire. Men dropped where they stood. Women shielded children with their bodies. Some survived by pretending to be dead, feeling boots step over them, hearing breathing through masks. And still, the killers walked away. Each time. No panic. No rush. As if this was practice. The night that broke a nation. November 9th, 1985. A Delhaize grocery store in Aalst. Families shopping for dinner. A father loading groceries into his trunk. A child tugging at a sleeve, asking for candy. Then the car screeched in. Gunshots echoed across the parking lot. People ran. Some didn't make it far. 8 people died that night, including a child. And when it was over, the killers escaped with pocket change. Belgium didn't just mourn. It froze. Because now everyone understood the truth. This wasn't about money. It was about power. A case that should have been solved. There were witnesses. There were descriptions. There were even children who wrote down a license plate. And yet, things went wrong. Evidence misplaced. Leads ignored. Police units refusing to share information. Egos. Politics. Silence. Years passed. The killers faded into legend. But the victims didn't fade at all. They waited. Why justice matters, even late. People ask me why I still care. Why dig into a case officially closed? Because justice delayed doesn't stop being justice. Because the truth doesn't expire. And because heroes don't always wear uniforms, sometimes they're witnesses who refuse to forget, families who refuse to be silent, and investigators who keep digging when everyone else tells them to stop. And what they uncovered was darker than anyone imagined. The case that collapsed from the inside. There's a moment in every investigation when you stop asking who did this and start asking something far more dangerous. Who allowed this to keep happening? That moment came not in a crime scene, but inside a police file that should never have existed in the first place. The first crack in the wall. By late 1985, Belgium was drowning in evidence. Shell casings. Witness sketches. Ballistics linking attacks miles apart. Patterns so clear they could have been traced with a child's finger. 3 men. Same weapons. Same choreography. And yet, no arrests. I sat across from a retired investigator years later. His hands shook as he flipped through copies of old reports. We weren't chasing killers anymore, he told me. We were chasing our own mistakes. Too many cooks, no one in charge. One of the biggest secrets the public never fully grasped was this. There wasn't one investigation. There were many. Different police units. Different jurisdictions. Different egos. Each holding pieces of the same puzzle, and refusing to share. Some leads died not because they were weak, but because they came from the wrong department. Witness statements were filed late. Ballistics requests sat unanswered. Evidence was logged, then quietly reassigned, then lost. And while officers argued behind desks, families buried their dead. The children who solved it, too late. One of the most haunting details never made headlines at the time. 2 children saw the killers flee one scene. They wrote down a license plate number. Carefully, proudly, they handed it to police. That number sat in a notebook, unfollowed. By the time someone noticed, the trail was cold, and the killers were already planning their next attack. When I learned this, I had to stop recording. Because evil didn't win that day. Negligence did. The weapons that spoke from the water. Years later, a fisherman pulled something from a canal. A gun. Then, another. Then bags of weapons, uniforms, and radios. Dumped. Weighted. Hidden. Ballistics confirmed it. These were the killer's tools. Which raised a terrifying question. Why dump evidence, unless you know exactly what will and won't be searched? Someone had knowledge. Someone had confidence. And someone believed they were untouchable. The rumors no one wanted to touch. Behind closed doors, whispers grew louder. What if these weren't random criminals? What if they were trained? Former military. Former police. Men who knew response times. Men who knew jurisdictional blind spots. The violence was surgical. The escapes were clean. And witnesses described discipline, not chaos. But every time investigators followed that trail, it vanished into silence. Careers stalled. Transfers happened. Files disappeared. The case didn't just stall. It was smoother. The giant. Witnesses never forgot him. Over 6 feet tall. Broad shoulders. Calm eyes behind paint. The giant, they called him. Years later, decades later, a name surfaced. A former gendarme. A man with access. A man whose brother would finally speak after his death. He confessed. He said his brother was the giant. He said he'd carried it his entire life. And yet, no trial. No courtroom, no sentence, because the truth arrived too late for the law to act. But it's not too late for history to judge. What justice looks like when courts fail. People often ask me, if no one was convicted, how can you say justice was served? Here's the truth they don't teach you. Justice isn't always a prison door slamming shut. Sometimes justice is exposure. Sometimes it's stripping power from lies. Sometimes it's giving victims their names back and taking anonymity away from evil. Because once the truth is spoken, the killers lose the one thing they wanted most: control. The real heroes. The heroes of this story were never the killers. They were the children who wrote down a license plate, the witnesses who never stopped talking, the families who refused silence, the investigators who kept digging when told not to. They didn't stop the bullets, but they stopped the forgetting. When the pattern finally speaks, there's a point in every cold case where the pieces stop feeling random. They start lining up. Not perfectly, not neatly, but enough that you can finally see the shape of what's been hiding in the dark. That moment came for me late one night, surrounded by photocopied police reports and grainy crime scene photos, the kind that still smell faintly of old paper and regret. I wasn't looking at faces. I was looking at patterns. And the pattern told a story no one wanted to hear. This wasn't chaos. Robberies are messy. Panic. Shouting. Mistakes. But these attacks, they were rehearsed. The men moved like they'd trained together. Covered angles. Controlled entrances. Neutralized resistance within seconds. They knew when to advance and when to pull back. They knew exactly how long they had. That doesn't come from desperation. That comes from discipline. The places they chose. At first glance, the targets looked random. Grocery stores, restaurants, small businesses. But when you map them, really map them, something strange appears. The locations sat near major roadways, jurisdictional borders, areas with delayed response times. They weren't just choosing victims. They were choosing escape routes. Someone had studied this. Someone had planned. Why the money never mattered. This was the detail that haunted investigators the most. They killed dozens and took almost nothing. Sometimes they left cash behind. Sometimes they abandoned registers entirely. Because the money wasn't the reward. The reward was fear. And fear spreads faster than bullets. Belgium changed after these attacks. People stopped trusting spaces, stopped trusting systems, stopped trusting each other. And that may have been the point. The theory no one could prove. Behind closed doors, investigators whispered about a possibility too explosive to print. What if the goal was destabilization? What if terror itself was the weapon? Some theorized links to extremist networks, others to shadowy power structures that thrived on panic and confusion. But here's what matters. No theory could survive without proof. And proof was always just out of reach. Files sealed. Witnesses intimidated. Memories faded. But one thing never changed. The killers always knew more than the people chasing them. The confession that changed everything. When the confession finally surfaced, years too late, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief. A brother, carrying a secret until the grave was already open. He named a man who fit the giant's description perfectly. A man who had access, training, and silence. Authorities couldn't prosecute, but they couldn't unhear it either. Because suddenly, the past made sense. What the killers didn't count on. They believed time would protect them. That witnesses would die. That memories would fade. That the case would become a footnote. They were wrong. Because while the law runs on deadlines, truth doesn't. Journalists kept asking. Families kept speaking. Independent investigators kept connecting dots, and slowly, the myth collapsed. Justice, redefined. No courtroom, no sentencing, but something just as powerful happened. The killers lost their masks. Their anonymity dissolved. Their legend shrank. And the victims, once reduced to numbers, became names again. Stories again. Lives again. That's justice, too. The lesson we can't ignore. Evil doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it walks calmly through automatic doors. Sometimes it wears uniforms you trust. And sometimes, it survives because good people stop asking hard questions. The heroes of this story didn't stop. And because of them, the truth survived long enough to be heard. The end of the silence. When I stand in those grocery stores now, I don't just feel fear. I feel defiance. Because these places are still full of life, laughter, routine, hope. And that's something the killers never understood. They could take lives, but they couldn't take meaning. This story isn't about monsters. It's about memory. And memory is how justice finally speaks. Even decades later, even when the law fails. If you're listening to this, you're part of that justice now. Because forgetting is what evil wants most. And we refuse. When justice speaks without a verdict, there is a lie we grow up believing. That justice always arrives wearing a robe. That it always ends with a verdict. That truth needs permission to exist. This case destroyed that lie. Because what happened here proves something far more powerful. Justice does not belong to courts alone. It belongs to memory, to courage, to those who refuse to look away. The names that must be spoken. For years, the killers were remembered by nicknames. The giant, the killer, the old man. But the people who mattered most were reduced to numbers. That ends here. They were parents who went grocery shopping and never came home. Children who trusted the world and paid the price. Cashiers, customers, strangers bound together by a moment they never chose. They are not statistics. They are the reason this story exists. And every time their names are spoken, the killers lose something they tried to steal forever: oblivion. The true heroes. History doesn't always crown its heroes with medals. Sometimes they walk away shaken. Sometimes they live with survivor's guilt. Sometimes they carry secrets no one should have to hold. The heroes were the children who wrote down a license plate while adults froze. The witnesses who testified again and again, reliving the terror. The journalists who refused to let the files collect dust. The investigators who kept digging after they were told to stop. The families who turned grief into persistence. They didn't have weapons. They had memory. And memory outlives bullets. What the killers never understood. The men who walked into those stores believed fear was permanent. That once unleashed, it would rot a society from the inside. They were wrong. Fear can paralyze, but it can also unite. Belgium didn't forget. It questioned. It demanded. It remembered. And in doing so, it denied the killers their final victory. Justice without applause. There was no courtroom climax. No gavel. No sentencing. No headlines screaming, guilty. But something quieter happened. The truth surfaced. The lies collapsed. The silence ended. And that is justice of another kind. The kind that strips power from evil long after it believes it has won. The lesson this case leaves us. Evil thrives where accountability sleeps. It grows in blind trust. It survives in fractured systems. It hides behind authority unchallenged. But it cannot survive scrutiny. It cannot survive memory. And it cannot survive when ordinary people refuse to be silent. That is the lesson written in blood and courage here. To the fallen, this story is for you. You didn't choose to be symbols. You didn't choose to be remembered. But you are. In every store aisle. In every parent who holds their child a little tighter. In every citizen who demands better from the systems meant to protect them. Your lives mattered. They still do. The final truth. The killers wanted terror. What remains instead is testimony. They wanted anonymity. What they left behind is exposure. They wanted to be feared. What they are now is known. And knowledge is the enemy of darkness. If justice is the act of restoring balance, then this story has done its work. Not by erasing pain, but by honoring it. Not by forgetting the dead, but by lifting them into the light. Not by letting evil fade, but by naming it, dissecting it, and refusing to let it return. This is how justice survives time. And this is how heroes are remembered. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for standing where silence once lived. Thanks for your time you always spend to watch our videos. We greatly value your support, so please share this video with your loved ones. Do us a favor and subscribe right away, regardless of where you are watching.